Well, hello everybody. Welcome to What Matters Worldwide. We're broadcasting on UCY.TV. A little later, coming up, we're going to talk about flood geology and some of the strata that wraps the world. Talking a lot about the Grand Canyon, or I will be at least. And I'm going to just jump off here and change this around. Let me go find my brother here in Skype. We're going to bring him in. I hope you're ready, Vic. Where? Such a long list here. There you are. I recognize that mug anywhere. And we're hit call. Hope you're there. Bringing you in early. Catch you off guard. I'm caught off guard. And one ringy dingy. Hello, Mr. Easley.
Hello, sir, Mr. Easley.
Well,
It's nice to be back. It really is. I enjoyed myself last time. I'm just not going to cover what I went through last, except just finish up on some of the sheet flow and some of the geology, which is very important. I think the biggest thing we need to carry over from the chronology that I went through all the history is that we have a set date, like 2269 BC for the flood, and I'm very confident on that. 20 years of study and really racked my brain to come up with these new numbers. So I feel pretty confident, 2269 for that.
now that's been a little while ago, and but I think it's very evident that we can see definite worldwide catastrophe, and not gradualism on laying down strata throughout the world. We see strata that wraps the earth. I mean, from popping up in the Colorado Plateau over in Pennsylvania and elsewhere around the world. Same ones down in Texas and that are in England, Israel, and other places. What I'm mainly going to be talking about will be the Grand Canyon flooded over. There's a dam in behind it, a Grand Lake. There's a series of lakes there, of Grand Lake and Hopi Lake. And I did some, on my maps on my cell phone, I popped it up and did some screenshots and just kind of blew it up and brought it from a little bit bigger to where it encompasses Southern California. And this is my own contention, and I was trying to find information that would collaborate what I think here has happened. But if you look, it looks like when that flood, it pushed all that debris west, and you find lots and lots of conglomerate rocks. That's just kind of like it's more or less like concrete, and thousands of feet of it. And then as that kind of pushed up and bermed up, and the waters started slowing down, I think the river then turned south into the Baja and emptied there. There's this very small delta in the Baja, California, and for all that sediment to have come through and been deposited out that supposedly eroded over long periods of time, the Grand Canyon, there would be a much larger delta. And we see deltas from different places in the world, and by measuring them, you can tell that they're only thousands of years old, and just by the size and the rate of deposition that falls out there. The Grand Canyon is more like a dam that's been breached, and it's just washed through. It's like, just imagine a mountain range or a big hump that's a dam. It's just a natural dam that's blocked back these huge bodies of waters behind it. And as it overflowed the dam, there was a breach, and it just ripped right through it. So there's some good pictures I've got here, and it shows the upper and lower Kaibab, where it's just mountains on each side of it, and it's just a mountain range right there, and you can see the snow cover on each side of the canyon. So there is a lot of debate in the evolutionary circle on how the Grand Canyon was formed, and all the way back to Lyell in the 1800s, and he explored that canyon, and they had a really rough time of it. Some of the guys climbed out and got
Killed by Indians.
Yeah, killed by Indians. It was a brutal event what happened to them, but I won't go into that. Anyways, he kind of had to go back up and change some of his thinkings too. But there's been different schools of thought throughout, and the creationist view is not new. That's been around for a long, long time, and to me, what makes the most sense. And I hope to share some good information. I know my brother, he's very apt at this information. Like you said, about 20 years of study, and I think you might be pleasantly surprised and really like what you're going to hear here, and may even make you rethink your thinking here. So, anyways, Vic, let's go ahead and get started, and tell us where you'd like to lead.
Well, we're looking at a model. None of us were there. We're taking the physical evidence that we see, looking at historical records, which I believe the Bible is a historical account. I have confidence in it. And using logic and common sense. Some people try to convince you because of the power of their personality, like on the news. Some people try to use it through intimidation. My strength, I like logic. I go for the logic. Does it make sense? Does it fit the evidence that we see? Weigh the evidence, use the brain that you have, come to your own conclusion. Like I said, we were not there. We cannot say this is exactly the way it happened, but we're trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Kind of your introduction, I agree 100% on what you're saying. We've always been together, hand and foot, pretty much on a lot of our ideas and our learning. Yeah. All right, so let's look at all of that water. Where did it come from? I mean, it said that there's enough water. It covered the tallest mountain by 22 feet. I mean, was Mount Everest then around? No, because we're going to go into a lot of the upheavals. Continents rose, valleys sank. Mount Everest did not exist at that time. The mountains were not that tall. There's a good possibility the diameter of the Earth was much smaller at that time. And possible the continental drift, the way they separated, was through an expansion of the Earth, through the core getting hotter, the atomic matter, more energy expands and all. It's possible. I don't know. We weren't there, but that is definitely one explanation that could happen. But like you mentioned last week, sources of the water. You had canopy of vapor above, which would provide a limited amount of water. If you had too much, there'd be too much heat, and the science would be against it. Besides, if all the clouds on the Earth now suddenly was to condense and fall in rain, it'd only cover the planet in 2 inches of water. So that's obviously not enough water to explain 40 days and nights of continuous rainfall. But Genesis 7:11 said, in one day the fountains of the deep burst forth, and the floodgates of heaven opened. And a lot of creationists hypothesize that waters bubbled up from the earth, from these subterranean aquifers, which watered the subtropical environment of the time. We can't say for sure there wasn't rain. We can definitely say that the environment was different since there wasn't rainbows, so the sun rays did not refract the same as they did after the flood. There definitely were environmental changes. The book of Joshua, which I mentioned before, actually mentions snow on top of a mountain. The book of Enoch mentions snow and rain. So I think to say definitively there's no rain before the flood is definitely drawing conclusions. So we had the Vanity Caper, our canopy provided water. We had the subterranean water chambers erupting forth, and we had the pre-existing oceans, which were probably much shallower at the time. So 3 sources of water. But you got to figure this volcanic activity. If the Earth split apart at its seams, like the seams on a baseball, you look at the Mid-Atlantic Ridge all the way through the Pacific, the Earth's past was violent. It's like the life of a soldier, long periods of boredom followed by intense periods of action. And that's what the history of the Earth is, the way I see it. So with this volcanic activity, it's spewing ash into the atmosphere, even into the stratosphere, which would eventually block sun rays, which would lead to a cooler climate later after the flood. But we're going to get into the Ice Age a little later. Hopefully time is allowing. So I'll try to move on here. But the waters spewed forth volcanic ash in the atmosphere. The dust particles, water condense around, comes down in massive rain pours. This is 40 days going on, 40 days and 40 nights Just look at a rain. And recently, Pakistan, twice in this month alone, torrential monsoons, flooding everywhere. The erosion, the landslides is making a cauldron of muck. That is like when you eat food, the saliva breaks down the food. That's just a precursor for the digestion to come. And 40 days and 40 nights, that really stirred and churned things up. During that time, a lot of mankind, a little smarter, they're going up on higher ground. A lot of the larger animals, they're going up. So that is why in the fossil record, one of the reasons predominantly smaller critters are on the bottom is because the more intelligent creatures, they went up higher to escape the flood. You'll notice in the Grand Canyon, which is 6,000 feet below the Utah sedimentary layers, is eventually eroded away, which we'll get to. There's actually tracks of animals, shallow currents and all of that, dinosaur tracks, salamanders fighting against the stream, underwater, in the Coconino sandstone. So that was obviously laid early on the flood when you have animals still, scurrying to get to safety. But this is getting all the sediment, churning it into a cauldron, like from Macbeth, double, double, toiling trouble, fire burning, cauldron bubble. Eye of newt, toe of frog, wool of bat, tongue of dog. You literally had tongues of dogs and wool of bats, all of that, all mixed together. That explains the fossil record we see today. The current carrying the sediments, debris, animals will naturally sift from smaller to larger. That explains why we see trilobites on the bottom, which are very complex animals. Their eyes are incredible. There's nothing simple about them. Then, in general, there's definitely exceptions to the rule. The larger the animal, the higher up it is in the fossil record. But we have intense geological activity started by 40 days and 40 nights of rain, just churning up everything. Then we had massive tidal actions coming to and fro, like we mentioned before, stirring, churning up, laying down sediments, digging it back up, redepositing it, okay? But what we do see are huge, huge, huge sedimentary beds that covers thousands and thousands of square miles, like you mentioned introducing the show there. This is not local floods we're talking about. We're talking about a global flood, just like the Bible and the Quran mentions. It is a flood of judgment, okay? But we're looking at the model. It was global. Evolutionists, we can see that there was catastrophism, but it is only on a local scale. But it's all over the earth. Local floods all over the earth. Well, from the biblical model, we look at it as one flood that's covered the entire earth, which is what the record is showing. Like the Coconino limestone, kind of like you mentioned, you saw a lot of the sediments come down from Pennsylvania, the Appalachians, which are making a lot of the beds in the Grand Canyon. That was northeast to southwest current flow, but that was later in the flood since that was higher up. Below that, you actually see the red rock limestone with estimated up to 1 billion of nautiloids, which are squid-like creatures, all aligned. Their bodies are like a cone, all aligned from the northwest to the southeast direction, kind of pointing towards Florida, which is the exact opposite of layers which were laid down further in the flood. And what's interesting about the nautiloids, since I live in Vegas, that comes all the way from the Grand Canyon all the way over here. We're talking about huge, huge beds of sandstone being laid down. And like you mentioned, deltas, we do see a lot of the sedimentation on the delta, but that is on a very, very small scale. How are you going to explain thousands and hundreds and even thousands of square miles of a continuous bed of sedimentary layer laid down? Well, kind of like the chalk cliffs in England on the English Canal there. That is up to 1,000 feet of limestone. And that goes all the way into Russian Georgia, all over Europe. It covers a lot of area. And there's even some which comes over into the United States, which makes sense if the continents at one time were together. then you will have a continuous layer being laid down. You're not going to have the ocean basins open at that point. And what's amazing is that the chalk beds is a form of limestone, and it was like kind of like toothpaste before it hardened. But if you look microscopically, blow it up 50 times, and you'll see trillions and trillions of tiny little sea critters in there, shells, all of that. Their shells break down and some fossilized to make that. So that tells you that the pre-flood environment was pretty rich. I mean, there's animals everywhere. The fossil record shows from every continent, from the South Pole, North Pole, everywhere. I mean, huge ferns, massive leaves, subterranean, subtropical climate from pole to pole. And is very rich in vegetation. And like we mentioned, we have all these waters being churned up. Animals are being caught in it. Vegetation are being caught in it. The flow and action of the water is going to sift the debris out by its category, what it is, and deposit them in massive beds. Look at these coal beds. I mean, how big are some of these? How thick? I mean, thousands of feet, a mile. I can't remember the data, but it's massive amounts. And vegetation, I mean, what is a foot down to 1 inch? I don't remember what the figures are, but there was a lot of vegetation. And like we mentioned last week, too, the Polystrate fossils. That alone is the evidence that destroys evolution, period. But, they ignore the evidence, they change it, they criticize and demonize or whatever. They refuse to look at it. But pine tree, all over the world, you see them going through multiple layers of coal layers. And evolutionists say that coal, like we mentioned last week, was formed, peat in a swamp that's deposited over thousands of years. Okay, pine trees don't grow in swamps, and it's not going to stay there 1,000 years to be covered up. But from the global flood model, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, of course you're going to have trees mixed together. Of course you're going to have pine trees in with Dioecious and conifers and all of that. It's jumbled together. Like in Germany, there are fossil beds with freshwater animals, marine animals from saltwater, land critters, bears, all of that, all jumbled together in one massive bed. Okay, how does evolutionists explain, dinosaur graveyards? They say, oh, well, there's a stream that was in flood, and you had one dinosaur was crossing, and then Elmo behind them kind of tripped over him, and then the dinosaur behind him tripped over, his domino effect, and they all kind of got caught in the flood, and they all drowned, and they all got buried. Okay, right, okay, that's a good story, all right. But what makes more sense? If you did have a global flood, which was designed to wipe out life on the planet, jumbled them together, indiscriminately deposited them in basins, later covered with sediment, which recovered more and more sediment, pressure, heat, all of that formed the fossilization. And you don't need millions of years to form a fossil. I mean, there's a coal miner's hat 100 years old in Australia that is found fossilized. There's actually a cowboy boot. This is Carl Baugh presented as a cowboy boot with a tibia fibula, the bone, the foot bone still in it, fossilized. And, that's only 150 years old or what have you. You just need the right conditions to be able to produce it. You can make oil in a laboratory in a matter of a week or so. You can make opals in a laboratory. You don't have to have long ages. That's an assumption. Okay? You have any input?
No, keep going. You're doing a really, really, really good job. Yeah, keep going with that, buddy.
Okay, so like I was saying, Genesis 7:11 says, in one day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, the windows of heaven were open, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So the flood described in Scripture was so massive that the very crust of the earth broke apart. Our planet's original supercontinent broke into several land masses. Those new continents apparently shifted about. The mountains were thrust upwards. Great cracks extended tens of thousands of miles were created, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Hot magma spewed up through volcanoes and cracks into the oceans. And for months, seawater covered the continents, and then retreated from the land. Months we're talking about, all this churning action, making this soup, this cauldron in the whole world there, laying down layers, churning them up, laying them down again. And these processes produce so much heat that the average ocean temperature climbed to possibly over 100 degrees. And that's important whenever we talk about the Ice Age here a little bit later. But let me kind of hint back upon what we were talking about last week. I want to finish up the idea about the sheet erosion and channel erosion. So how did the water drain off the continents? Because every geologic feature we see today is based upon this. Continents being lifted. Just like on day 3 of creation, the dry land emerged out of the waters. That at that point would have also created sediments, erosion, and all of that. So before the flood, you did have sedimentation and all. Okay? So Psalms 104:8 says, "A mountains rose, a valley sank down to the place which you established them." And just conventional geologists, they acknowledge that. And I quoted Lester King from his book, Wandering Continents and Spreading Seafloors on an Expanded Earth. Said the fundamental, basic tectonic movement of all global geology are vertical, up or down. Every part of the globe on the continents or in the ocean basins provide direct geologic evidence that formerly it stood at different levels, up or down. And there have been repeated tectonic episodes, always in the same sense. The land goes up and the seafloor goes down. Of course, evolutionists assume it's over millions or billions of years. You know, the biblical model is a little different. And we covered also in Wyoming, you have the granite upper crust, which at one time was continuous. But there are variations, I mean, all over the state, from 14,000 feet high, 20,000 feet low, with a differential of 45,000 feet of elevation change. So, of course, if you have the continents rise up, valleys sink down, it's going to make basins. All of this sedimentation about is going to be deposited in these basins, like in Las Vegas Valley, where I live. You know, you have Sunrise Mountain, French Mountain, they rose up. There's a basin, and that was all covered with a lot of the sedimentation. And probably a lot of that was post-flood, too, at least what I try to dig through. Dug 4 feet down, and man, that is some rough digging. It's like concrete almost there.
That's really a lot of pretty places out in the desert and around Vegas, Valley of Fire. Really, really pretty rock. The Navajo sandstone is like rainbows. Oh, it's pretty awesome. And
beautiful. Just spend time in the desert, and you see traces of the flood everywhere. Because if evolution was true, you have a flood or whatever is going to explain the sedimentation layers. I mean, how are you going to explain it over such a huge area? I mean, you had an ocean cover it, and you had deposition on there. Now, it doesn't make sense. A global flood does. But you look at the layers. If it was millions of years old, you're going to see erosion, okay? Because the wind, the rain, and everything is an enemy to smooth, flat contours and layers. I mean, it just doesn't happen. It battles it. But what we see in the Grand Canyon, the layers everywhere, go through where highways are cut through, the hills and all of that. You see these sedimentation layers, which are perfectly flat. Some are uplifted, some are tilted, but most all are just perfectly flat.
Here in
if
Arkansas,
evolution was true, you're going to get erosion deep through many layers. Then you'll have another flood, will cover them up, and then another flood, and it's going to be like EKG, you know, heart rhythm there, up, down, up, down. You're not going to see these smooth contours.
Yeah, here in the Arkansas sandstone, they're just layers and layers and layers, and just you know, consistent. I've worked a lot around a bulldozer, and just seeing the excavation. You'll get different clays and different types of the soil will change color. Really, really beautiful. There's some rainbow clay that, I mean, it is fantastic. Purples and all, man, reds and stuff, and just blends. And it's the same. That's the same coloration that you would find out in Valley of Fire up there with the Navajo sandstone there.
So, yeah, that's similar to like Monument Valley, which is beautiful red sandstone, but it's soft. I mean, you pick up any of the rock there, and it just flakes right off. I mean, right off. I mean, millions of years, I mean, wind alone, I'm sure, would have rode that into nothing.
Yeah, you have to see how it's laid. Everything was laid down underwater, and it's all deposition, and it would just be like this, like talking about earlier, this giant swirl just tumbling everything up, and not only that, it would at times sort it out too.
Yeah.
But in turbidity, you're laying down this conglomerate of everything, that mud flow like you're talking about, just rolling ahead, and so if you just look at the air over the west, or if you've been flying and stuff over there, I know a lot of people have, and you can just see how the water's just ripped and flooded. So it's not only was it laid down, but it was also washed off. So at the beginning there, it just tumbled up and redistributed and silted out and so forth in sections, and big ones. We're talking about this stuff is laid down in water that stretch around the globe. So, I mean, and like you said, without erosion, I mean, you can just see it. So, go ahead.
Yeah, Google Earth is something amazing. Just look at that. Look at the features on the Earth. I mean, it looks like it's a war veteran. Continent spread apart, and you have the Indian continent push up through Pakistan, raising up the Himalayan mountains there. And what's fascinating, there's marine fossils on the tallest mountain, Mount Everest, Himalayan mountains, all of that. I mean, it makes sense because if they're covered by water, they were pushed up. On Mount Ararat, there's huge salt crystals that can only be formed underwater, marine fossils. But it is an undeniable fact every square inch of this Earth has been covered with water. There always 12 years ago and then recently in the Dead Sea, they find underwater civilization. That was not pre-flood. There is no features on the Earth today which are pre-flood civilization. The pyramids cannot be pre-flood because they are built upon limestone. Remember, limestone comes from these tiny little sea critters there. It's riddled with sea caves. This wave action would have just washed that into nothing in no time and would have redeposited it. There would be nothing left of the pyramids. Like you mentioned, turbidity current, cavitation, which are bubbles, bam, bam, it's a jackhammer, bam, 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 able to break them loose. The waters come, pick them up, and then they'll redeposit these huge boulders. Like on the Facebook page, you see the picture I posted of one huge boulder balanced on another. I mean, the thing weighs tons and tons and tons. But the water, what it can carry, sedimentation carrying rate is equal to the square root of the flow of the water. So it's not just a linear increase, exponential increase on what it can carry around. I mean, carrying a boulder like that is nothing. I mean, 2 inches of water could carry a car away. It deposited, then probably, you had sedimentation around it, and then later it came and it washed it away. But anyway, let's get back onto the sheet flow. Like I said, continents rose up, valleys sank down, oceans sank down. That caused a sheet flow of a water flowing off the continents. Obviously, different stages of the flood, the current was different. Like I said, the Nautiloids point from Washington State to Florida, but yet the Coconina limestone originated from the quartz crystals in the Appalachian Mountains toward Pennsylvania and all of that. So the exact opposite. So there's no set rule of thumb. What caused all the difference in currents, I don't know. Okay, but the evidence showed that there was. So sheet flow caused massive erosion as the floodwater ran off the continents, eroding ridges and cliffs and leaving erosional remnants on land. And there's, that's these mushroom-shaped sedimentary pillars and all of that, where the stem of the mushroom was softer sediment, which was eroded, and then the harder rock remained. But we find these everywhere. And what's the most fascinating to me is the Devil's Tower, which is the throat of a volcano, where you have the lava coming up. It was surrounded by the cone of the volcano. Then you had the water level, even with the top of it, which is 1,200 feet above the floor on the surrounding terrain, just sheared it off flat because the waters just cut it off there. But yet, you look at the lava, I mean, it's perfect squares. People climb it all the time. At one time, they said, well, this was 40 million years ago. Then they changed the sign, well, 1 million years ago, because they realized 40 million years of rain, sleet, hail, freezing would be just a pile of rubble today. But yet it's only a small pile of rubble on the bottom, which points to a relatively young age. Monument Valley, like we mentioned, 1,000 feet of high soft sandstone. Water's retreating off the continents. You know, you just put your garden hose out or watch a rainstorm. Just watch the way it cuts gullies and all of that. Planation surfaces are all over the earth, where kind of like the Devil's Tower is plain flat. And we see mountains all over the earth, which were planed off from the very top there. You have the Cypress Hills in Saskatchewan, Canada. They're 600 meters, 1,800 feet around the surrounding plains, and they're perfectly mesa top, flat, which showed at one time they were eroded by fast-flowing water there. But yet there's other mesas and mountains which are at different elevations, 4 of them there, which shows you continents rose, sank. The peak of the flood was the Cypress Hills there, where it planed it flat, water or flowing off, draining into the ocean basins, planing off more surfaces. Evolutionists can't explain this type of feature. It's just they can't explain it because these processes are not repeated. The flood was a one-time deal. On top of the Cypress Hills, like you talked about, conglomerate gravel deposited from the flood. I mean, this is coarse gravel. And like I said, water action is going to sift it. Fine grain things will be on the bottom. Smaller critters will be on the bottom. Coarser things will be on the top. But on the very top, 1,800 feet above the surrounding plain there, it's 1,500 meters above sea level. Obvious evidence it was covered by fast-flowing water, deposited all this conglomerate gravel. Another thing which is amazing are quartzite rocks, which are found all through the hills, all originated in the Rockies, carried hundreds of miles, deposited different places. And what quartzite rock, it's one of the hardest rocks known to man, and it started out as regular sandstone. It was buried deep in the layer, really hot. It got impregnated with like a cement-type material, became like a metamorphic rock, and really, really hardened. Then, like I said, this turbidity current, the cavitation, bam, breaking up from the granite foundations to the other sedimentary layers, and then redepositing it. That's why you got huge boulders sometimes, the ones that weren't carried by glaciers, deposited all over the earth. But what you see on these quartzite rocks are percussion marks. With bam, these rocks going, churning around. I mean, it's huge, like a cement mixer in overdrive there. These rocks crashing on each other, rounding the edges, just round. And some of these quartzite rocks are 400 pounds or more, just the ones on the surface. No telling if there's some on the deeper. But these are carried hundreds and hundreds of miles there. But this is solid evidence that you had to have had major hydrologic accidents sometime in the Earth's past. When was it? Well, the rocks don't talk. The dating methods are unreliable, potassium, argon. The only way you can get a reading from a laboratory, you tell them what layer it came from, and they already have the geologic column. Oh, okay, they already have a ballpark. The reason being, every test, whether potassium, argon, whatever it is, are going to give arbitrary ratings from millions of years to billions of years. And any date that does not fit the established evolutionary geologic column is thrown out, it will not be published. And there is censorship, huge censorship going on. Even conventional archaeologists, if they find any sediment or any civilization that contradicts the current pet theories, they're going to be ostracized, they're going to be out of a job. It's terrible what goes on. I mentioned last week where a tugboat captain contracted by Smithsonian said that he's contracted, take them out, they're dumping tons of artifacts into the Atlantic Ocean, which contradicts their pet theory. And that is intellectual dishonesty. How can you make progress if you don't confront the facts, come up with a theory, make sense out of it, and then move on from there? I mean, that is the only way you're going to get peace in the world or unity with mankind is in honesty. I mean, as long as people are out with their own selfish ideas and agendas, I mean, we'll never reach harmony. That's neither here nor there. But anyway, so here's Beartooth Mountain in Montana. Once again, It's a granite mountain. Remember, granite is a bedrock. Plain flat by the sheet flow erosion. Then on further down, you see a lot of the erosional remnants as the waters eroded and cut into the granite, because the violent nature of water is incredible. Just, look at a garden hose even on a small scale there. So the water moving off continents planed the land, forming the planation surfaces. An erosional surface is defined as a land surface shaped and subdued by the action of erosion, especially by running water. The term is generally applied to a level or nearly level surface. So it is an inescapable fact that the features of the earth was formed by water. You cannot deny it, period. Okay, I want to go ahead and get into the channel erosion. So the channel erosion forms water and wind gaps. And what that is, it's a perpendicular gap through a mountain range or a plateau through which water flowed through the gorge to the other side. Water will cut through a high surface, and there's over 1,000 of them throughout the earth. Okay, what the evolutionists don't understand is that you have a water gap where, you have like a valley with mountains, high ridges, or whatever all the way around it. It cuts through to release the water flow. But yet, it shows that just a short distance away, there's no more mountain. It's just flat. It's a path of least resistance. The water should have gone that way. So they can't understand that through uniformitarian means. But yet, if, like we said, continents were raised, you have basins formed, deposits, sedimentation deposits laid down, water is going to go path of least resistance. You got to realize these sediments were not hardened rock at that time. They were still soft. So whatever a crack, wherever you had a volcano, an earthquake that made a crack that allowed the water to go through, it's going to take advantage of it and just cut right through it, just like the Grand Canyon. But then through the course of the post-flood activities and the geological activities, the rest of this ridge was eroded away, leaving no trace of it except for the water gap. What a wind gap is, it just partially eroded through, and then for whatever reason it found another path to drain, so water will not flow through it, but still wind will reap through it. Okay, another thing that we want to look at, submarine canyons. Okay, this sheet action, draining off the continents as they rose up, draining into the ocean basins. What separated the continents? Not really sure. Maybe, like I said, is expanding Earth because the core got hotter. Who knows? I heard this one theory where water jettisoned forth from the subterranean water chambers along the mid-Atlantic ridge that made a lubrication under the tectonic plates. They are separated, reaching speeds of 100 miles an hour. They collided and all of that. But if that was true, that happened the day one of the flood. So where's all the sedimentation in the ocean basin? So that's why I don't buy that. The continents had to split towards the end of the flood because you do have from the east coast of North America, west coast of Africa, continuous sedimentary layers. Like you put the pieces back together and then they fix right up. Same thing, same type of fossils right on there. They used to be joined together. It couldn't happen early in the flood. It had to be later on, and the only thing that makes sense. The Monterey Canyon by San Francisco is a mile deep and 50 miles long. As a water sheet flow ran off the continents, the sedimentation was deposited along the continental margins there. And that's why you see a kind of smooth, gradual slope and then drop off into the ocean depths there. You actually have a barren canyon, which is a submarine canyon, is longer and deeper than the Grand Canyon. You want to add anything, Vincent?
Guys, you're rolling along pretty good. I might add stuff that's buried, like, for instance, where we get our gas and oil and coal and so forth, and also artifacts that are found that are out of place. But with the flood theory on especially coal, and you see the upright petrified trees that go through several levels and even coal seams in between. In order for all this stuff to have gotten down there, it would have had to been a whole lot of vegetation in this world. So I would contend that it's possible that the Earth was not on its axis but spinning, and there were no seasons. So we find rainforest and stuff up in Alaska and the Arctic regions, and it's all just, the whole world. We've got stuff that's been buried and buried deep and fast, and that's the only way for this process to take place is with that pressure. I'd also add that I would call for myself. I think sometimes it might have been and maybe not have been that Pangea, but I've seen two different models on that. But on the Pangean, it was like a rapid transmigration of the continents. When you had these caverns, these great caverns that held all this water below, there as the water was gone, there was this cavernous void. So as the collapse occurred, you would get it'd be pushing what was left in front of it. It would push it, and that would cause the uplift for mountains and all that. These tectonic plates as they would be crashing together, and pushing up. And there's different instances and so forth of that. Let's see. We find coal and natural gas and oils and stuff all throughout, under the oceans and stuff. So you would have like floating masses of stuff that would just fall out and then be covered over with other dirts and sands and so forth that come into pressure, and then they turn into rock. So it's all trapped down there. There's such great volumes that to think, where could all that come from? Because it required a huge amount to make even a coal seam. I don't remember what the ratio is, but maybe like 10 feet for 1 inch or something like that, or 1 foot, whatever it may be.
There's evidence in the geologic record for tsunamis on the order of 1,000 feet high. The flood was much more devastating than we give it credit for. Much more damaging. It destroyed the world. The Bible says that, we believe that, but I got to tell you, it destroyed the world. It conquered it. It was like a military campaign, and it destroyed the earth.
So go ahead, Victor.
Pretty soon I want to get into the Ice Age. What I want to kind of cover the Grand Canyon a little bit, and then eventually go into, how a possible dam eroded it quickly there. But the Grand Canyon, all the sedimentation through there is 6,000 feet or so less than from Bryce Canyon. But yet there is a continuity of the sedimentation layers over to up into Utah, covered by 6,000 feet of additional sediments there. Like I said, in the Grand Canyon layers, we see some fossilized animal tracks, the nautiloids, and all of that. They were deposited earlier on in the flood. The only thing that makes sense, because I don't think you'll have an animal tread water for a year. Eventually, this was eroded. What's biggest thing I think that you should take out of this, look at the tallest sedimentation feature around, like right by the Grand Canyon is Red Butte. I forget, I think 1,000 feet above surrounding land, I forget what it is, which means that at minimum, the sedimentation used to be at least 1,000 feet higher than it is there. Look at any of the tall pinnacles, anything that tells you sediment used to be at least that high, possibly much higher there. So the Grand Canyon, at one point, of course, you had a continuous layer, but like we mentioned, the catastrophic nature of water, it keeps churning stuff up, redepositing it and all. So the upper level is in the Bryce Canyon area, like 12,000 feet over sea level. That's over 2 miles. A mile of sedimentation was eroded away over where the Grand Canyon is now. The Kaibab Plateau was literally lifted up. So what came first, the Grand Canyon or the Colorado River? You remember, Vincent, when I was 8 years old, you're 9 years old at the Grand Canyon. I'm reading, well, the Colorado River carved this canyon over millions of years. And I remember at the time thinking, this makes no darn sense whatsoever. And, 40 years later, it still makes no darn sense that the Colorado River carved that. Look at the Mississippi River. You don't see the Grand Canyon of the Mississippi or anything like that.
Okay. I like to say that the The river's there because of the canyon. The canyon's not there because of the river.
Yes, sir. What came first, the canyon or the river? I say the canyon
I
came first.
I say the chicken.
Toothpicks, pardon?
Watermelon.
All right, so go ahead. Like I said, we have the Kaibab Plateau lifted up because continents rose, valleys sank. So that, in turn, had a dam and obstruction, a huge lake, and all of that. So tell me what you think of that.
Well, go ahead and just expound on it some more.
The evolutionists don't understand how you had the Colorado River go uphill and cut and form a Grand Canyon like that. It doesn't make any sense. But if you did have, like you said, ridges being uplifted throughout all the area, blocked, you posted a picture about that post-flood huge lake there. He had a ridge holding back all of this water. If that was breached, then you're going to have hundreds of thousands of gallons of water poured out. And what we learned from Mount St. Helens is things are catastrophic. With all that steam blast going and melting all that glacier ice, it causes lahars and mud flows. It carved mini Grand Canyon 1/40th scale in a matter of hours. You had micro-thin layers of mud flowing at fast speed where if they didn't see the before and after, didn't know for a fact the time frame it was formed, you say, oh, well, these thousands and thousands of layers obviously was formed over thousands of years.
Millions of years, I'd say.
Exactly.
Millions and millions.
But you see, the Mount St. Helens was a baby volcano. It was equivalent to 25,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs, one a second, going poof, 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 poof. But yet, the Yosemite volcano that erupted was 2,000 times greater than Mount St. Helens. And Mount St. Helens, though, is a great model, like petrified forest, both in Arizona and up by Yosemite. Come on, up there. It's not Yosemite, that's in California. What is up there, Montana, Wyoming? Where the Old Faithful?
Yeah, it's, hey, you're supposed to some. It's
But anyway,
it's
what we
Yellowstone, of course. Boy, I was like, boy, pay attention to me. I'm talking to you. Don't you know it's for your own good?
about as sharp as a bowling ball. But the pyroclastic blast of Mount St. Helens blew down enough trees to build 580,000 or so two-story homes. I mean, that is a lot of forest. Spirit Lake was transported a mile or two up, and a lot of these trees blanketed this lake. Bark, logs rubbing against each other, bark coming off, being deposited as peat on the bottom. Some of the trees become waterlogged. Some of them, roots are sheared off too, okay? And all the petrified forests, you have no root system. They're all sheared off. Some trees will become waterlogged. They'll sink down. They will be deposited as upright floating logs. Some of them will lay and they'll be flat, horizontal. As more and more deposition covers them up, then you see what we see in the petrified forest throughout the West there, what appears to be different forest over millions of years, when instead you had the trees deposited in a lake at different layers, all depending on how quickly they sank down. But what explains the features of the world is catastrophism. It's not slow, gradual processes. Look at any petrified forest. You do not have root system, no root ball, and these been sheared off because, like I said, these quartzite granite rocks there, percussion marks, bam, bam. It is violent activity. There are very, very few animals which are fossilized intact because they're ripped limb from limb. Bones are broken. That's why, they get excited if you find an animal intact or whatever. We're not talking about the Ice Age animals, because there was a lot of flooding and deposition and fossils made at that time too. We'll go cover that here in a second. But instead, the Earth's history is extremely, extremely violent. Okay, so after the flood, we still have the Earth reeling to and fro, trying to come to some sort of homeostasis, come to an equilibrium. We know from the fossil record that post-flood man faced constant flooding, dust storms, supervolcanoes, massive earthquakes, meteorites, downpours of snow and rain on a scale never seen before. That's where you get the idea of Atlantis and all of that. It's obviously rooted in some type of ancient civilization that was destroyed. Like I covered before, the flood was 2269 BC. I feel firm in these dates here. The Tower of Babel, the separation of man, was 337 years later. Abraham, in the famine that when he went to Egypt, was 367 years after the flood. It would have been 1902 BC. Egypt, the first leader, Osiris, who is Mizraim, Medes, who was a grandson of Ham, was in that time frame too, in the 1900s BC. Joseph, whenever he became Pharaoh, or co-Pharaoh, was about 550 years after the flood. And what I want to get into now is the Ice Age, because like I said, we had super volcanoes going on, right from Minoan civilization, right out especially Atlantis, all of this stuff. We have civilization come up intact 300-400 years after the flood there. You have the Tigris River Valley, formed no bottom layers where there's evolution from Stone Age to Bronze Age and all of that, but they have hot and cold running water. They have sewage system, advanced civilization. The Sumerians, extremely advanced. The Egyptians, very, very advanced. Hinduism is one of the most ancient religions on the world, which I believe comes out of Babylon and Nimrod. And then whenever the dispersion of man went to the Tigris River Valley, originally they're descendants of Shem. Later you had the Hamites come from Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They kind of merged together. They formed the Indian civilization and with the Hinduism. But Hinduism talks about Vishnu, who had a city off the west coast of India, which at one point is now underwater, and that's been recently discovered and stuff. We see some Egyptian hieroglyphs, which what appears to be a helicopter, airplanes and all of that. But the further we go back, it appears that ancient man was more advanced. I'm not going to get into this much. Sometime I want to do a show and really get into how the civilizations arose, how we get Zeus and all of that.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating. I think there's just so much that's there, and I'm gonna let you give your final thoughts for this episode, and Ken's gonna be coming up, and then after that, Jose. Man, you've done an awesome job, Victor. I really appreciate it. Fantastic information. Yeah.
Just kind of off the cuff there. But let me just on the Ice Age, it makes sense. Very hot temperatures in the ocean that caused a lot of evaporation. Over time, that causes massive snowfalls. Immediately after the flood, Antarctica was not covered by ice. That is why there's ancient maps that shows the original continent there before it's covered on ice. We only saw it with sonar in the 50s and stuff. But then this massive evaporation, hot ocean, causes massive ice dumps, which over 500 years or so created the Ice Age, which covered a good part of the globe. But you had mammoths, very large Ice Age mammals. And there's some laws, which I'm not going to get into much, but says that post-flood, the Ice Age animals get big. And also another law says that the colder the environment, the bigger the animal. Because bigger you are, less surface area, more volume, you're going to conserve heat and stuff there. So you did have natural selection, speciation, animals becoming specialized in their niche, in their environments. The glaciation in Alaska, there's a lot of low-lying valleys. One of these low-lying valleys went from Siberia over into Alaska. You had all this water caught up in ice, so the ocean levels were much, much lower at that point. That allowed the migration of man over the Bering Sea there because there wasn't a sea at that time. Yet DNA shows that Native American Indians have Asiatic DNA. So you have low-lying valleys, these people migrating, spear a mammoth and, eat mammoth meat and stuff there. There's no problem explaining the migration of man from there. You had different atmospheric conditions, superstorms, Okay, just a small increase in ocean temperature can literally magnify a storm sixfold. You have super hurricanes. I mean, this magnitude 5, that ain't nothing. That's child's play. Massive, massive. That is why you talk about in the Bible, you know, Lot and Abraham. Where do you want to go? I want that lush valley in the Dead Sea. What? Really? You know, you go for. Well, at that time, atmospheric conditions were different. Some people say it's irrigation. I believe the climate was different. You actually had more rain at that time, so it was different. The Sahara Desert at one time was lakes everywhere. You know, look at Chad Lake the way it's shrinking now even. It used to be advanced civilization, stone tools, petroglyphs, carvings, all of that, all through there, rhinoceroses, giraffes, hippopotamus. Well, Mizraim, you know, which is Osiris, the first pharaoh, was killed by hippopotamus. So he kind of had his life cut a little short. So you had the mammoths, okay, living in these low-lying valleys surrounded by glaciers, you know. And now we find in the tundra of Alaska and Siberia, frozen mammoths, preserved, flash frozen, buttercup still in their mouth.
Oh yeah, there's
well preserved.
Yeah, well after the flood, we find stuff in the La Brea tar pits. Vic, I'm gonna have to close out with you. We're gonna bring Ken in. Ken, say something. I'm gonna make sure I got a good connection with you. Victor, you done a great job. Yeah, we've got you, Ken. Say hello to my brother Victor.
Hello,
Hey,
Ken.
Victor.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah,
I'm doing really well, thanks.
All right, it's all yours, Ken.